I used to think silence was safety. The hush of the marble halls, the soft glide of curtains so expensive I never asked the price, the quiet choreography of staff who spoke in lowered tones because wealth echoes louder than any shout. In that silence, I mistook stillness for certainty. I am Edmund Vale, a man who claimed the Atlantic before my body began to betray me, who turned ships into fortunes and fortunes into foundations, who learned that everything is negotiable except time. And time, for me, has started to thin like old paper. Perhaps that is why I notice the afternoons first, a pattern in the quiet, a rhythm hidden inside the noise of a city that never gives you back exactly what you give it. She would leave after lunch, always after lunch. Never a fuss, never the perfume-cloud exit of a socialite hungry for photographs. Inna was 35 years younger than me, sunlight shaped into a woman, a kind of impossible that made people whisper we were a transaction, not a vow. I told myself I didn't mind the whispers. I told myself I knew her. I told myself many things. Truth, it turns out, doesn't argue. It waits. And on a Tuesday, wrapped in ordinary weather, truth stopped waiting. I saw her from the balcony the first time it snagged at me. The driver opened the gate. Inna stepped into the car in a dress with practical pockets, the kind she wore when she wanted to be anonymous. The car turned left, not right. Right is the private clinic, the gallery, the tennis club. Left is the city's unedited face, the hills that push against the sky, the neighborhoods that appear on our news when something breaks. I stood there with the glass sweating in my hand, feeling something fragile inside me tilt. The car disappeared and left me alone with the taste of metal on my tongue. When you are my age, doubt feels like vertigo. A tilt becomes a fall if you're not careful. I have lived long enough to know that love and fear often wear the same coat. And so, I did not accuse. I did not ask where she was going. I followed. Not personally, not at first. I told myself it was prudence, not jealousy. I told myself the city can be cruel to women, to anyone who isn't encased in security. The truth is, I wanted to control the story before it could write me out of it. The driver I trusted called me by the honorific he'd learned from men like me, Sir, layered over Sir, until you couldn't hear the person underneath. Sir, she is heading north, he said. Side streets. She asked me to drop her near Morro de Luar. A hill with a view and a reputation of concrete and courage. My breath snagged. My blood went cold. In the privacy of my office, with the door closed, and my name staring at me from spines of donated books, I felt ridiculous and ancient and terrified of becoming a punchline. Wealth doesn't save you from dread. It just buys it better furniture. That afternoon I learned the first rule of suspicion. It multiplies, fast, like mold in darkness. She told me she was going to a life drawing class. She told my housekeeper she was visiting a friend from church. She told the concierge at the clinic she would see him tomorrow. Lies or careful edits. The line between them is thinner than my patience ever was. I sent the driver again the next day. I watched through an app, the blue dot sliding over a map like a secret I didn't consent to. Each time the dot stopped near the same block. Each time I pictured a face I hadn't met. Each time the quiet in my chest grew teeth. On Thursday, I went myself. An old man with a good hat can disappear better than a celebrity with 5 bodyguards. I sat in the back of a cab that smelled of eucalyptus and tired hustle and let the city swallow me. When we reached the base of the hill, a boy crossed the street carrying a crate of oranges bigger than his torso. A woman laughed into a phone. A stray dog slept in a pocket of sunlight. Everywhere, movement, life, uninterested in my categories. I paid and climbed slowly, each step a negotiation with a knee that used to take stairs like a dare. I was sweating by the time I reached the corner where Anna's car had been seen, and there, like a scene staged to break me, I saw her, with a man. Their shoulders almost touching. His hand had the kind of calluses that do not come from gyms. I tell you, I nearly turned around. I nearly surrendered to the story the city would write for me, the headline humming with schadenfreude. I did not. I stood, small and old and stubborn, because I have learned in boardrooms and hospital rooms that you don't leave before the last line. But when the man leaned in, and Anna laughed, soft and unafraid, something inside me cracked, and in that crack, a voice as old as my first deal whispered something I had not let myself think. Maybe the person you love is capable of joy without you. The thought detonated. But the worst was yet to come. You hear my heartbeat because I am telling you this as if you are in my study, because stories like this do not belong to the rich or the poor, the old or the young. They belong to anyone with a pulse and a secret. My name is Edmund Vale. I made my fortunes in shipping, in ports where men still roll their shoulders as if the ocean might punch them. I married late, in the winter of my ambition. When the ice began to show on windows, I pretended weren't mine. I met Anna at a fundraiser where the music was expensive and the applause even more so. She spoke like she had a map in her mouth. She looked at me without flinching, the way you look at an horizon you intend to reach. You may judge me easily. I have judged me easily. But judgment is lazy. What I want, if you are willing to follow me down this crooked staircase, is to show you how fear turns clever, how love grows clumsy, how the mind of a man who thinks he is losing becomes an echo chamber that convinces him he already has. If stories are a currency, then here is mine, costly, crude, unpolished by publicists. If you stay, I promise you discoveries that felt like knives and ended like balm. If you're watching this on your phone, on your commute or in your kitchen with the light on, a little too late, tell me where you are listening from. Tell me, because loneliness thrives on anonymity and I am tired of feeding it. Subscribe if you need to know how a suspicion can masquerade as protection. Comment if you have stood in your own doorway and questioned whether the house you built was a museum or a home. Share this if you know a friend who is walking around with an ache they call by other names. I am not selling salvation. I am narrating a fall and a landing, a confusion and a clarity. The city is Rio, though it could be anywhere a hill meets a view and the view meets a fence. The afternoon is ordinary, which is when ordinary lives get rewritten. There was a time I thought love was inventory. What I provide, what you provide, the balance sheet dressed up as romance. Inna taught me briefly that love is appetite and attention. Then the afternoons began, and memory turned predatory, circling only the moments that supported the darker theory. I watched our breakfast table like a detective surveilling a park bench. I started to count uncountable things, pauses, glances, the number of seconds between her reading a message and her smile arriving. It is embarrassing to confess. It is necessary to understand. I did not confront her because confrontation is a spotlight, and I have learned to work in shadows. I hired no private investigators because I wanted ownership of this failure. I let no friend in because rich men tend to collect cynical advice, and I did not want to hear it operated on my life. I followed quietly in taxis and rented cars, in a cap pulled low, watching the world that was her world when she wasn't being watched by mine. Each time, the same corner, the same block, the same man with hands that told the story of labor. If you have never felt it, jealousy is a biology, not a mood. It darkens the edges of vision. It changes your gait. It makes the day smell different. Ashia. I became an archaeologist of her expressions, digging for proof. And there she was, stepping into a doorway painted the blue of hope, vanishing into a building where laughter spilled out of windows, not because of champagne, but because someone had turned up a radio they couldn't afford to break. I stood across the street in the shadow of a jacaranda and told myself this was the last day I would tolerate the insult, the lie, the betrayal that tasted like rust and childhood. In the car home, I rehearsed the scene, how I would lay out the timing, the facts, the strategy of deception that arrogantly assumed I would not recognize, contempt dressed as compassion. I would be calm. I would be reason. I would be a man who does not explode so much as implode, quietly, catastrophically. And then, as the car turned into our street, I saw her already home, barefoot on the patio, her hair tied back with a ribbon that had once been my mother's. She looked up, and the softness was not an act. It was a place she lived. My rehearsed fury stumbled. It did not matter. I told myself mercy could wait. If you are still with me, know this. The story you think you are in can shift under your feet without warning. Keep listening, and if you have not yet subscribed, do it now, because there are things I am about to tell you that will make you question what you take for granted about people you claim to know. The city is still humming. The hill is still there. The door is still blue. And I, an old man with a ledger full of victories, am about to learn how little I understand about winning. But the worst was yet to come. I wanted to catch them. Not in the crude, tabloid sense. I wanted to catch the script in the act of writing me as a fool. The following Tuesday I returned to the hill. I wore an old linen jacket that had memorized my shoulders and a pair of shoes that didn't announce me. The sun was generous, shadows sharp as confessions. I saw her arrive with a tote bag heavy enough to swing. The man was already waiting, leaning against the blue door, with patience, learned from something other than privilege. They didn't touch. Their greeting was familiarity without flirtation, which enraged me more. If she had been careless, I could have dismissed her as cliché. But she looked at him the way you look at someone who knows your worst days and invites your best anyway. They entered. I crossed. The blue paint up close was blistered where hands had worried it. The metal handle was warm. I pushed through a foyer that smelled of cumin and detergent and children who had borrowed joy for the afternoon and had no intention of returning it. On a bulletin board in blocky handwriting, a sign, Club du Loir, after school, before night. Bring what you can, take what you need. A sound rose like a tide. Laughter, yes, but also concentration, the kind that glues a child to a task they've decided belongs to them. I moved down a corridor into a room bright with mismatched chairs. On the chalk-scarred wall, a map of Brazil hand-drawn in a dozen crayons. In the center of the room, a circle of kids passed around a tattered book like a contraband jewel. And there, kneeling, my wife read aloud, her voice scaled to the room. Next to her, the man, Mateus, I would learn, translated her rich vowels into simpler rhythms, adding little dances of his hands when a child's attention threatened to drift. I stood in the doorway with a kind of shame that stings behind the eyes. She was not betraying me with romance. She was betraying me with goodness. The jealousy didn't vanish. It mutated. Suddenly, I was on trial for not knowing, for not noticing, for not being the kind of man she could invite without losing what made the place breathe. A girl with hair in tight braids looked up at me and frowned the way children do when a stranger warps the air. "Tio," she said to Mateus, "who is the rich grandpa?" The room giggled. The word grandpa struck me like a slap and a blessing. Mateus stood. He was taller than I'd hoped and younger than I'd feared. He came to me with open hands, unafraid. "Boa tarde, senor," he said, and in flawless English, "Welcome to Club du Loir. We try to keep the afternoons light." His smile didn't defer. It included. I nodded, because the only thing worse than being caught is pretending you weren't. I looked at Anna. She did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had been waiting for a storm and was relieved it had finally broken. We found a corner where the light cut a clean shape on the floor. "You followed me," she said, not quizzing, naming. "I did," I said, "because what is the point of old age, if not to be honest when it costs you?" She inhaled, a breath that gathered a decade. "If you had asked," she said, "I would have told you, but you would have tried to make it yours, a photo on a brochure, a new wing with your name. Sometimes I wanted to bring you, sometimes I wanted to keep this quiet, so it could keep being real." Mateus didn't leave. He stood nearby, the way a tree stands. He explained the schedule without being asked. Reading circle, homework help, a borrowed guitar at 4, sandwiches when there are enough. He told me how one afternoon became 5, became a week, became a small gravity children fell into gratefully. He told me about Lucas, who stopped fighting when someone taught him how to hold a pencil differently. about Beatrice, who does math like music, about the teachers who drift in after their own long days to volunteer because survival is communal here. And he told me where Anna fit. She read, she listened, she found patterns, she sold a bracelet to buy notebooks. She learned the names of parents who could only come on Sundays. I tried a joke. My voice cracked on it. And what do you do with rich grandpas who wander in? He didn't hesitate. We watch what they do when no one is watching, he said. Then we decide. The clean truth of it hit me harder than any accusation. Anna touched my sleeve, a formal gesture, almost ceremonial. I didn't want your pity, she said. I didn't want your power. I wanted my afternoons to be mine, so I could be a person somewhere you weren't a monument. There are moments when your spine learns a new shape. I felt mine straighten and soften at once, but an old habit clawed back. And him? I said too quickly, nodding at Matthias, a craven return to a cheaper story. Her laugh didn't scold. It cut. Jealousy looks childish on you, she said softly. He is a teacher, a social worker who was a child here. He teaches boys to breathe before they swing. He teaches girls to argue with numbers. He is a man, not my secret. I should have left then, proud and dignified, to compose my apology in a room where no one could watch me be small. Instead, I stayed. I stayed for the guitar, for the way 24 voices found the same note like a miracle. I stayed to watch a boy spell his name all the way through without stopping. I stayed until a storm gathered on the horizon and the room smelled like rain and crayons. And then the door swung open and a shadow filled it, and the room's noise fractured into pieces. A man I did not know, with an expression that knew how to put fear on a schedule, stepped inside. He wore the posture of someone whose name moves things. You again, he said to Matthias. Annoyance poured over contempt. I told you. The donation buys the space. The papers are signed. Construction starts Monday. He did not look at Anna. He looked at me, assessed the watch I had not bothered to hide, and smiled the way sharks might if they believed in humor. Ah, he said, new investors. He was wrong about me. He was right about the storm. But the worst was yet to come. You learn quickly in certain rooms that power is a choreography. Who stands, who sits, who waits until silence makes them larger. I watched the man take the center as if this were a stage that belonged to him. He introduced himself by not introducing himself, which in this city is as loud as trumpets. He said permits and zoning and a new development that would bring jobs. He said the words people use when they plan to extract and call it contribution. The children watched the adults the way children do when they're deciding which world to believe. Matthias did not stand taller. He stood truer. We have a lease, he said, signed by Donna Celeste. The man cut him off with a flick that tried to make him into a fly. She needed money, he said, a patience that was pure performance. She sold, we bought, papers are clean. You people can read stories somewhere else. He gestured vaguely toward the hill, as if you could point at a community and call it background. I felt something I had not felt in years, the ugly rush of a boardroom fight I used to relish. Decades of negotiations, of men who believed volume was a substitute for argument, of deals made in rooms where the city's heartbeat was a muffled drum. I stepped forward before I could talk myself out of it. May I see the papers? I asked. Not asked. Stated. The man turned toward me, polite contempt slipping a shade. He laughed without teeth. Who are you to ask? He said, and then saw it in my posture, in the particular way age and money can make a person incandescent. Recognition softened his mouth. He named me. He named my companies, old and new. He named a ship I had christened when my knees still worked for free. What he offered next was not respect. It was calculation. I admire your work, he lied. Maybe we can find a way to collaborate. He meant absorb. I recognized the smell. Once, I had smelled like it. Anna's gaze was a circle I stood inside. No, she said very softly. No deals that look like generosity, but taste like erasure. The room, children, volunteers, a mural of a moon painted by small hands, waited. I could have written a check and built a better building in a safer neighborhood with better gates. I could have established a program that made my name a verb. I could have turned this into a photo, a press release, a speech in which I used the phrase "give back" without choking on it. But the room had rules that were older than me. The club existed because afternoons are long and danger borrows free time. It existed because women like Anna and men like Mateus had the audacity to believe something should happen between homework and night that did not hurt. The man checked his phone as if time belonged to him and announced the construction crew would be here Monday. He suggested we clear out fast to avoid inconvenience. The word ricocheted off me. Inconvenience. I remembered the boy with the oranges large as a hope. I remembered the girl who measured the world in decimals. I remembered my own boyhood in a different city when I learned that afternoons can kill you if you don't have somewhere to put them. I remembered the day I chose money over music because someone told me money keeps you from drowning. They did not tell me you can drown in money too. "Show me the papers," I said again, older and unamused. He hesitated. In the space of that hesitation, Mateus reached into a dented locker and produced a folder that had been handled more than honored. Receipts. A lease. A letter from Donna Celeste, typed on a machine that punctuated its sentences with the faint apology of old ink. The signatures were there, the terms clear. Then the last page. An addendum with edges too crisp, a font too clean, a signature too smooth. I have spent a life watching numbers lie with a straight face. This was not numbers. This was an insult to handwriting. I looked up. The man smiled the specific smile of one who has learned the odds favor him. "Bureaucracy is messy," he said, "but let's be reasonable." Reasonable had paid for my house. Reasonable had also put me in a cab to a hill where my wife knelt to read to children who owned almost nothing and guarded everything. I pulled out my phone, not to call a lawyer, to call Donna Celeste, the landlord the hill knew as a grandmother before they knew her as a signature. It rang into the hush like a dare. She answered in a voice that had taught generations when to go home. I asked her a question. "Did you sell?" Her pause was an entire life. "I signed what they put in front of me," she said. "They said it was a lease extension. They spoke fast. I read slow." The man exhaled theatrically, irritated that his script had been interrupted by reality. I thanked her, told her we'd come by. I hung up. "You forged consent," I said, and the room inhaled the way audiences do in courtrooms on TV. He loosened his jaw, shrugged a fraction. "I followed the process," he said, "which is what processes are for when people want to hide. I should have swung. I should have walked away to plan a refined attack with cocktails and columnists. Instead, I remembered another call I had made once in a different battle when time was short and what I wanted could only be moved by someone who didn't owe me anything. I called a judge. Not my judge. A woman who had thrown out one of my permits a decade ago and earned my permanent respect. I told her what I was looking at. I told her I knew the difference between stubborn and right, and this smelled right. She told me to send scans. She told me to keep everyone where they were. She told me something that felt like a hand on my back. "Don't let anyone take anything until the morning." We stayed. We stayed like a vigil. Volunteers made sandwiches out of air and hope. Children turned the vigil into a game because children are mercy pretending to be chaos. The man left, promising consequences. The storm finally broke, drumming the roof like an audience that wouldn't disperse. Anna leaned against me in a way that felt not like forgiveness. Not yet, but like an agreement to walk in the same direction. In the quiet that arrived between thunder, she told me the worst part, the part I had not guessed. "I thought about telling you," she said. "I didn't, because if this place had been yours, it would have stopped belonging to them. And I couldn't risk that. I chose them over your pride." The admission stripped me bare. I saw the shape of my shadow on her afternoons. I saw the kind of man I had been too long, effective, adored, and casually imperial. It hurt, cleanly, the way truth does when it removes a splinter you've grown around. We waited for morning. We waited for a call that would tell us whether the law was an instrument or a weapon today. We waited while the children slept in chairs and the mural moon looked down with borrowed light. And when the phone finally rang, it carried a verdict through the storm. But the worst was yet to come. The judge issued an emergency injunction at 7:43, the kind of ugly miracle that keeps a city from eating its own heart in one bite. The order froze the transfer. It demanded an inquiry into the addendum that wore a forgery like a cheap suit. It named the club. It named the hill. It named the daylight that had been stolen back. The man who had promised consequences arrived with a lawyer whose shoes cost more than the guitar and left with his jacket damp with defeat. The children cheered in the ordinary, casual way kids cheer when the adults decide to be decent. We didn't win a war, we won an afternoon. And sometimes that is the only unit of victory a place like this can hold. Donations came, of course, once the story found a journalist with a conscience. Offers, too, the kind that taste like the first bite of a fruit that used to hang too high. I wrote a check in the end, but I wrote it to a trust that Mateus and Donna Celeste would control, not me. I asked that my name go nowhere near a wall. I asked to be a volunteer whose wealth was time. The apology I owed my wife was not elegant. It didn't need to be. Elegance is what I had used to avoid repentance. I apologized for the surveillance I called protection. I apologized for believing that love confers ownership. I apologized for the years I'd treated goodness as a line item and not as a language I needed to learn. Anna listened the way a person listens to the ocean, aware it can be both him and hazard. She forgave the way a person forgives when they've already decided the work is worth it. Not theatrical, not absolute, real. We went back the next week and the next. I read terribly at first. My voice was trained to sell, not to soothe. The children instructed me without mercy. I learned to hold a pencil the way Lucas had. I learned to let Beatrice explain the math to me while I shut up. I learned the names of mothers who worked 2 jobs and fathers who were present in ways my generation was not trained to count. I learned a city can be a wound and a remedy. I learned an old man can become a beginner without the world ending. You came here for scandal. It's okay to admit it. I came for it too at first. I thought this would be a story about betrayal and wealth and humiliation. It is, but not in the way you think. The betrayal was mine, of the vow to trust before I investigate, of the promise to be curious instead of terrified. The wealth that mattered wasn't mine. It was the afternoon's. The humiliation I feared delivered me into a humility I had not practiced since I had to ask a bank manager to believe in me when I had nothing to mortgage but nerve. If you have listened this far, tell me where you are. Tell me what your afternoons look like. Tell me if there is a door near you, painted a color you remember from a happier time. Subscribe if you want more than headlines. Share if you believe victory can be measured in sandwiches and songs. Comment if you know a place that needs defending, a person who needs an apology that is not clever but is clean. I won't promise easy stories. I will promise true ones. As for me, the old millionaire, I now spend Tuesdays carrying crates, listening to laughter that does not require my name to exist. I stand beside a wife who taught me that secrecy is not always deceit. Sometimes it is a sanctuary protected from the gravity of my influence. I stand beside a teacher who understands that dignity is not a resource we dispense, but a muscle we strengthen together. The hill is the same. The moon on the wall is chipped where small hands have granted it texture. The door is still blue. It will need painting again. We will find the paint. And if you are wondering what became of the man with the soft shoes and hard eyes, know this: he will return. Development is a tide. It recedes. It advances. We will need more afternoons, more injunctions, more readers who become doers. We will need you. Because the lesson is simple and savage. A city is saved in hours you can count. We counted this one. We will count the next. The worst? It already happened. I almost let suspicion replace love. The best? It began the moment I decided to learn another language. The language of enough. The language of us. But the work ahead of us has only just begun.